All right. First rule of this channel, we not talk about this channel. Second rule of the channel, this is not legal advice. So this is going to be the 2024 fantasy football offseason preview for the Las Vegas Raiders, and it still is a little weird saying Las Vegas. In this case, I did move Zamir White and Davante Adams down a lot. That's because I'm expecting this offense to be like low volume. That's just how they ran it the last of the season, and there are certain things about them being low volume and how the usage of these players are going to shake out that make me go, they're not going to be able to win me leagues, and I'm less enthusiastic about them. If their prices are too high, that means that they're not even punts, and that's a bad thing. And we're talking about you, Davante Adams. Maybe the best out of the bunch is going to be Brock Bowers to theoretically be able to get in that like top 10 tight end range. Those guys tend to grow on trees at that point, and then Zamir White might be a running back too. That's the general idea behind all this. There are certain teams, and I can pull up my notes, so I'm looking at them. There are certain teams that like it's just going to be how my process functions. I am looking at opportunity first. That's the main thing to look at, and then trying to figure out like how roles are going to function, how those opportunities are going to convert into like points overall. And then one of the biggest things, like start talking about like the good and the bad and the ugly of some of these offenses, like how the player's story works to win or lose me a league. If I don't think that they can win me a league, I want them to be someone else's problem, right? And sometimes like some of the stories about how guys win leagues are very boring. Sometimes the story is a punt, and I have to be able to weigh that risk and reward versus what they do. So like the general idea is that staying away from offenses that are not good is a good idea. I imagine the Raiders are going to be somewhere in that like not good area. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the team is going to be bad. It just means that like I just don't know how they win me leagues. So let's get into it a little bit. So last year, Josh McDaniels, the head coach, gets fired. They bring in or they promote Antonio Pierce to finish the season off, and then they give him the keys to the kingdom in the offseason. Last year, they were 23rd in passing yards. I'm going to think that that's going to stay relatively consistent. They were 30th in rushing yards. I'm going to expect that goes massively up. I would not be surprised if they lead the league in rushing next year. Points for, surprisingly to me, was 23rd. Points against was 9, and I am going to expect that like that will stay relatively consistent one way or another. I would expect that the Raiders are going to be competitive all year. They may make the playoffs. They may be a little surprising. They may end up being a train wreck. In order for them to take this massive step forward, they have to become efficient on offense, and they have to maintain being good on defense. Think the 49ers. I don't necessarily think that's going to occur with them overall. And I have this brought up. The line between like those good offenses and then like those not bad offenses or like, like okay offenses, it becomes really broad because last year, like basically the Raiders were in that like middle of the road category where it just doesn't matter between like your Los Angeles Rams being 23 points a game and your Raiders being like your 19 points a game. It doesn't matter at that point. Like if you're good or if you're okay or you're like not good, it just compresses together. And then there's certain issues about like efficiency. It becomes harder to predict how offenses are going to function on a week to week basis, and you're going to get burned on certain weeks. And if those weeks happen at the wrong time, like you're going to lose a league. That's the long and short of it. So expecting that certain guys are going to burn you when they're drafted, and this is why I don't like guys like AJ Brown who did get moved up because of the Davante Adams getting moved down. Like I don't like guys that I have to count on burning me. So if I've been watching that guy like do good all year and I know that range of outcomes is going to happen, I know that like it could happen during the playoff run. That's just how I view things. You can view things the way that you want. So anyways, talking about like Brock Purdy, this is what Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew has to be. They have to become like this high efficiency, low volume passer. If you're expecting that to happen, I'm not. I'm expecting that like maybe we can get like okay play out of one of the two of these guys combined with like a better defense. And I bring this up the 2020 season with Dak Prescott, the 4-game split before he broke his ankle when he was on pace for 6,700 yards passing, 36 touchdowns, 344 rushing yards, and 12 rushing touchdowns. And again, that's not how stats work because he had a 3 rushing touchdown game during this 4-game sample size. So that would push that up. But the reason why I bring this up is the fantasy holy grail is always going to be very, very bad defense to go along with a very, very good offense that has a lot of bites at the apple because of how bad the defense is. So if they don't meet those criteria, that fantasy holy grail, we should start slowly but surely backing away from those pieces because they're just not going to have the volume to do anything, even if they are a higher efficiency offense. And unless we get these outlier type seasons where you see the 49ers last year, lowest pass attempts, highest yards per attempt at 9.3. The Raiders, who had about 60 more pass attempts on the season, were also about 3 yards per pass attempt lower. So even if we try and say that the Raiders are going to be better, like 7 yards isn't going to make a difference. 8 yards probably isn't also going to make a difference either in this case. Like they're just not going to be good enough. Expecting that the Raiders defense is going to be very ugly to play against from a fantasy perspective. All right. So let's move on to the quarterback room. I have Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew combined at quarterback 32. So we can figure out how they're going to split. I don't think it necessarily matters one way or another. Gardner Minshew might have slightly more week-to-week fantasy appeal because of the nimbly bimbly. I don't think that's going to be there with Aiden O'Connell. You're expecting Aiden O'Connell to become like this high-volume passer. That's also not going to happen. Or he's going to have to be like very efficient. And again, that's why I bring up our Brock Purdy shares. He's just going to have to throw a lot of touchdowns on lower pass attempts because that's just what he becomes for him to be fantasy relevant. You also need him to do that for the toys to pay off. So it doesn't really matter. Like, well, if you're like, well, I'm not going to play Aiden O'Connell anyway, it doesn't matter. He has to be Brock Purdy before you get return on these investments. So in any case, Gardner Minshew, and I have his contract pulled up. He did a 2-year, $25 million contract. He is going to be on the team next year, 15 million of it guaranteed. And then next year, like one way or another, he's going to be on the team. So to bring up our Aiden O'Connell shares again, I'm going to imagine he's a 4th-round draft pick last year. He's going to start the season off. It's going to be easier for him to get benched and then for them to roll Gardner Minshew than for them to roll Gardner Minshew and then roll Aiden O'Connell afterwards, because Gardner Minshew is going to be on the team next year. There may be a little bit of the tank on, but and I'm listening to some of the other guys out there, like the bootleg guys, very odd roster decision to bring Gardner Minshew in. It's very hard to tell the story between him and Antonio Pierce where they're tanking. It looks like they're going to try and be competitive. And it also looks like they don't have the talent to do that. So again, expecting that we're going to get this higher volume type of season, like maybe we can get this. It looks like it's going to be very dependent on game flow, and that's harder to predict on a week-to-week basis from a fantasy perspective. All right. So moving on to the running back room, this is what we're all here for. Zamir White, the 3 guys that we're all here for, Zamir White, Davante Adams, and Brock Bowers. Zamir White got moved down for me all the way to running back 15. And this was like at the beginning of the year, I think I might have had him at like running back 5 at one point. This is just how my process works. He does look like he's going to be in line for about 20 touches a game. They're not going to be the right touches. That's the long and short of this. He's going to need a lot of red zone opportunity. I don't think the offense is going to be good enough to support that. He's also going to need receiving work, design receiving work in particular. And they have Amir Abdullah and Dylan Labe that they brought in this case. So you're probably looking at a guy who's going to get 70% work. He's going to get a limited amount of red zone opportunity, and he's just going to get all the gravy that doesn't really matter from a fantasy perspective. So you're probably looking at this like 2022 Miles Sanders season where like, yeah, he could do 300 or so carries at about like 5 yards a clip. That could happen. That's a higher end of range of outcomes. Maybe you're getting 2022 Josh Jacobs. You're also looking at like running back 13, 250 carries, 1,200 yards, 11 touchdowns, no receiving work. That's what you're going to be getting. That's why I would put him at running back 15. If even when Josh Jacobs did this in 2022 with the 340 carries at about 5 yards a clip, he only had 12 touchdowns. And you really want to be pushing higher towards like that 20 touchdown range and above 1,500 total scrimmage yards for that guy to be a running back 1. If the guy's doing under those 2 numbers, he's probably closer to an RB2. So unless we're expecting that we're going to get this massive blow up from Zamir White, primarily based off of volume and not efficiency, and that becomes a lot harder for him to return outside of that running back 2 landscape. The other thing that I would look at with Zamir White in this one is that he is when he was finishing the season, those last 4 weeks of the season, about 70% snaps, which is where I think he's going to be at. Look at week 17 where he did 57% snaps. That's where you see the jump in Amir Abdullah. Amir Abdullah was doing the 28, 27, 22, 27 those last 4 weeks. In this case with him, special teams guy who is the trusted passing down back, the pass blocker. So maybe Dylan Labe is able to take that over, which would bother me in and of itself if it wasn't for the fact that like if Amir Abdullah is doing the snaps that Zamir White needs to have to be an RB1, it just doesn't matter. Like he's an RB2. That's what you're paying for. That's what you should be expecting. That's just going to be how it rolls. And Amir Abdullah is doing 1 year, $1.8 million with 850 guaranteed this year. So, like, yeah, I'm expecting worst comes to worst with this backfield that he's going to get the passing down snaps, which is going to drop the ceiling of Zamir White in this case. They also brought in Alexander Madison. He is 1 year, $2 million with 1.6 guaranteed. Yeah, he's the backup. If they're paying him 1.6 guaranteed, like, they're not going to cut him. So the big thing in all this is 6th-round draft pick Dylan Labe from New Hampshire. I would be expecting there's a possibility that he gets the design passing work role in this offense, and they actually create plays for him to put him on the field, like design opportunity going not to Zamir White in a way that Amir Abdullah, who's going to be like 31 this year, I don't think they're going to give him design passing work. I could definitely see that they're going to give Dylan Labe design passing work. And again, that's going to drop the overall ceiling of Zamir White. There's almost no way that he's going to get like the full bell cow. He's going to be a limited opportunity guy. And that means that he has to be like really efficient with red zone opportunities. And there's going to be limited opportunities for red zone with this Raiders offense being in that, like, not good to okay type of range that we're expecting them to be in. So anyway, Zamir White, he's my running back 15. He's going running back 22 on Fantasy Pros, 67 overall. On ESPN, he's going down here at running back 27, 77 overall. Like, I like that, but you're looking at him being more of a replacement level guy. We'll talk about this here in a second. And then on Underdog, he is going as running back 21 with an ADP of 85. Remember, that's a best ball league. That's wide receiver meta. That trying to figure out like what he's going to give you in a best ball league. You're going to get those spike weeks, the handful of times that he's going to score touchdowns. And again, you're trying to guess like what the overall line is going to be on his rushing touchdowns. I would put it probably closer to 10 because of how the offense is going to be structured. It's going to be like heavily run based. They're probably just going to get into the red zone and just go like, here's Zamir White. Here's like 3 consecutive rushing plays. So it would not surprise me he gets about 10 rushing touchdowns. Again, that's probably not going to be enough to move the needle without design passing work or a massive step forward in the Raiders offense for him to get closer to 20 rushing touchdowns. That's just how it's going to work out in general. So on ESPN here, if he's going at running back 27 overall, I would be interested in him to falling to me at value to potentially be like an RB2, a flex, a replacement level back. What you're running into the problem of with the ceiling, the cap ceiling that he has, combined with what you're going to be spending on him or guaranteed you can go up and spend on him, is you're going to be passing on guys that could definitely win you leagues, or at least have the road to win you a league in a way that Zamir White can't, just based off the story that we're trying to tell. So Kyler Murray's going to have rushing upside, looking at some of the other guys in this area. Dalton Kincaid might be a unicorn. Jonathan Brooks may be a second half league winner if he's going to get the design passing work for the Panthers. Anthony Richardson's going to have like that cheat code, that running back or the rushing upside, quarterback upside that you need. Trey McBride might be a unicorn. And these are going to be the guys that you're going to have to make your decision on. And there's a couple other ones here, like Terry McLaurin might end up having that like top 10 wide receiver season, going at about the same range. So he's got a higher range of outcomes than Zamir White would have in the same range. And then you're looking at like Kyle Pitts. These would be the guys that I would be looking at going like, well, I have a better chance to win my league than essentially punting on Zamir White that may be capped out closer to running back 15, in my opinion. All right. So moving on to the wide receiver room, and it's a similar problem with Davante Adams that was inefficient on his 175 targets. So I was doing the math beforehand. If we're expecting that Davante Adams is going to have about 150 targets and Brock Bowers is going to be like fantasy relevant, that would mean that the two combined are going to have about like 270 targets. About half of the Raiders passing attempts are going to go through Davante Adams and Brock Bowers this next year. Keep that in mind because you're going to need Aiden O'Connell to take such a massive step forward in efficiency that he's able to support not an 1,100-yard Davante Adams season. He's going to have to get up to like, again, we're talking about these guys like Brandon Ayuk, something like that, like 1,300 yards. Plus the other thing in this is you're expecting such a massive step forward in overall Raiders touchdowns. He can't do 8 to return on investment. He's got to get back up to like 11 to 14. It just becomes very difficult for him to do that. He's likely going to finish closer to like a high end wide receiver 2. I can bring this up in points per game because that's basically what he was last year. If I can get it to work, that's basically what he was last year. Again, your scoring settings and my scoring settings are different, but when you look at like Davante Adams at 15.6 points per game, low efficiency season, right next to Brandon Ayuk, that high efficiency season, 175 targets to 105 targets, and they both finished at like 15.6 yards per game. And Brandon Ayuk on 70 less targets had one less touchdown. So it just becomes very difficult to move Davante Adams forward, knowing that he's 31 going into the season. He's going to turn 32 in December. He's part of an offense that's going to be low pass volume, low efficiency. It's very hard to figure out how he's able to take that jump. And then again, it just becomes an issue of going, well, where's he going in the draft? Are there other guys that have the ability to win me a league? Like, I mean, I would love to be in the range of having to choose between Davante Adams and then Garrett Wilson falls to me. That makes it really easy. The fact that like Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson are separated on ESPN by like 3 picks is ridiculous to me. You do what you want to do. And in this case, with Davante Adams, like there are other guys that I would be steaming ahead. Again, Rashad White having the theoretical upside because of the rushing or the passing floor to be a running back 1 going roughly 10 picks lower than Davante Adams. These would be the guys that I would be looking at. Again, drafting guys at their ceilings, I think, is generally a bad idea. And I think his ceiling is probably closer to wide receiver 12. That's where I have moved him down to, considering the age apex and now the offense, the lack of opportunity to score touchdowns in the offense and how inefficient those opportunities are going to be. On Fantasy Pros, he's going wide receiver 9, 15 overall. Like I said, like that's way too rich for me, and I can just pull this one up. There are other guys in this area that I would be more interested, like a Marvin Harrison Jr., especially because of the lack of the age apex in that case. They may theoretically end up with the same fantasy stat line, but I'll take the guy with the higher ceiling, and right now that's going to be Marvin Harrison Jr. relative to some of these other guys. Like Travis Etienne actually has been moving up just generally because he's going to be attached to a better offense than some of these other guys. He survives a little bit. Again, I got to go pull him up. He moved up to running back 11. I am liking Joe Mixon a little bit more if he's like relatively going to be in this range of guys. Probably going to be a little bit higher. But the point being is, guys attached to better offenses are going to give you more of the good opportunities, and guys attached to less good offenses are going to give you more of the bad opportunities. So Davante Adams going at like wide receiver 9, 17 overall. Like I don't know how you win the league. I don't even know if it's necessarily a punt at that point. On Underdog, he is going at wide receiver 13 with an ADP of 19. So like, yeah, there are probably other guys that are going to not only be safer, but have higher upside relative to where Davante Adams is going. And again, that's not based off the player. That's just based off the situation. Lower passing volume. It's going to be likely inefficient because they're going to play defense. Other guys to talk about in this wide receiver room, and this is part of the reason why I talk about, like, if he gets 150 targets and Brock Bowers gets 120, and you're left with about 290. Some of those are going to go to the running backs, not just Zamir White, but the receiving running backs, Amir Abdullah and Dylan Labe. You're also going to have a certain amount that are going to go to Michael Mayer, and then the rest of the wide receivers have to divide that up. And they have 3 other wide receivers to take on, their part of that 290, projected targets. Jacoby Myers, he is outside of draftability. I'll talk about that here in a second. Probably going to end up with a coin flip of having the same statistical year of Davante as Davante Adams in this offense, just to be aware. And I don't like drafting guys that can't win me leagues. He is wide receiver 49 on Fantasy Pros, 117 overall on Underdog. He's wide receiver 58 with an ADP of 121. And then on ESPN, he's going like wide receiver 52, 124. Again, there's probably going to be lottery tickets in this range that I would be rather throwing my dart at, like a Chase Brown or even a Jerry Jeudy that theoretically have higher upside. Xavier Leggett, where's Blake Corum, those type of guys, like to have a higher ability to score more points than Jacoby Myers does. Even though I could definitely see that Jacoby Myers and Davante Adams, like their overall stat lines end up compressing together at Davante Adams age apex together with like Jacoby Myers eating into that inefficiency, may end up giving a slight spike to Jacoby Myers. I don't know how that wins me a league, even at the point. Like buying a high-end wide receiver 3, I don't know how that wins me a league at that point overall, in this case. And like I said, like, I would rather be putting more of your Lad McConkeys and Brian Thomas Jr.'s into my cart because of the upside than a guy who's limited, Jacoby Myers, unless you're in those like super deep leagues. The other two guys to be talking about in this case would be Michael Gallup. He signs a 1-year deal with them. I imagine that he's going to be competing to play the X so they can move Davante Adams around. This is where it gets a little interesting because those two wide receiver sets that we're going to be paying attention to in camp, if Michael Gallup is not on there, then that means Jacoby Myers is going to be probably the number 2. If Michael Myers is the number 2 on paper, with Davante Adams, that's going to lower the overall ceiling of Jacoby Myers, and we still haven't even got the tight end room. Last but not least is going to be Trey Tucker. He is, I think, a 4th round draft pick last year. He's going to be like the speed vertical slot guy. He is going 353 on Fantasy Pros. Michael Gallup is going 282. Jacoby Myers 117. So yeah, I probably would be staying away from all these guys because of those capped upsides. And then last, what everybody's waiting on is Brock Bowers. So Brock Bowers is my tight end 14. He's going 12 on Fantasy Pros, 113 overall on Underdog. He's going tight end 11 with an ADP of 101. And then on ESPN, he is going 131, tight end 13. Again, this would be one of those guys that I would be willing to throw a lottery ticket at late in my draft just to see how it shakes out. I would be expecting him to get in this range of about 120 targets, which would put him in line to be this year's Sam Laporta. The biggest thing, and this is part of what's going to make him very volatile, I could see trying to roll your Brock Bowers out as your starting tight end at the beginning of the year. I think his stat line may be actually closer to Dalton Kincaid at the end of the season. It's going to be an issue of trying to figure out how this offense is going to function. Is he going to function as the number 2 in the offense and they're moving him around, which would boost his value, as opposed to them trying to run him as like a tight end 2 with Michael Mayer being the inline Y. So like they're going to limit the snaps of Brock Bowers, and that's why I would look at Dalton Kincaid splitting time with Dawson Knox last year. So like that snap share is going to be down. If you're not on the field, then you're not going to get opportunity. Some of what's needed to push guys forward has to just be from being on the field. And that includes getting into the red zone and being the number 2 tight end and not being brought in with the opportunity to score red zone touchdowns. So like that's stuff to be looking at in general. But like I said, I do think that there is some ability for Brock Bauer to be like sub-elite this year if the Raiders utilize him. Unfortunately, even if I project him out for 120 targets, they're not going to necessarily be efficient. And, that's going to be one of the things that's going to overall cap what he can do. If they are theoretically going to use him in a particular role, which I hope they would, he would have the ability to be a unicorn if he's going to get like closer to like 200 opportunities. Don't think that's going to happen. It would be nice if that's how the Raiders wanted to run their offense. That's why he should be drafted in all leagues because of that going on. So in general, that's how I would have it. And I do think Michael Myers, like in deeper leagues, could still be drafted because there is an opportunity for the number 2 in the offense. And if he's the guy that's on the field every single play, and we can bring up Michael Myers in this case, Michael Mayer in this case, with bringing up your Cade Otton. If Michael Mayer is going to be the guy that's going to be on the field like 80-90% of snaps this year, he would have the ability to flirt with like tight end relevance, tight end 1 relevance, X, Y, and Z. So anyway, that's about all I got for the day. I'm not entirely excited about anything with the Raiders, and we'll be back tomorrow.